Will.
Thank you. Good morning, Secretary of State.
Morning, Will. Now, money is often a question you get asked about, isn't it? How much more money does a school budget need?
Well, we need to make sure, obviously, that across education, including in schools, that we have the right level of funding that we need to make sure all children can get a world-class education. There are also questions, though, of course, about how you spend your money and about the best use of your assets. And we're coming up to a spending review, and all of these things we will be taking full account of course. We benchmark ourselves against other countries in the world. We also look historically at how much we are spending compared to the past. But we also have to consider what the pressures are. Indeed. And so, for example, high needs has been an increasing pressure.
Question.
So,
there isn't a single figure answer to Will's question.
Okay, so the figure of roughly £2 billion is not something you'd recognise as the figure then?
No, I think we need a lot more than £2 billion to educate.
No, indeed, in addition to. So as we approach the spending review, what assumptions underpin your bid?
Well, as I say, there's multiple considerations, including how you spend your money. So, high needs, as I was just coming on to say, has been an increasing pressure that we've seen in our system. There's actually more money going into high needs than in the past, an extra £1 billion over the last few years, but still those pressures are there and increasing.
Okay.
So we need to do things to tackle those pressures. That's partly to do with how you spend your capital. Making sure there's the right number of special school places available, making sure there's capital for inclusion units and so on in schools, but also about how you equip teachers, what you do in initial teacher training. There's a whole range of things. Yeah. Look, if you look objectively across the world and say, does the United Kingdom spend significant amounts of money on education? The answer is yes.
It does indeed, particularly if you take into account university spending and the private sector as well. It certainly does.
No, even if you don't, William. So if you look at state spending on primary and secondary schools, and you look at the G7 nations, the United States spends the highest in terms of cash per pupil. But then below that, I mean, we are in line with or above all the other nations of the G7. This is the OECD figures from 2015.
Why is it then that schools in my constituency, which have been some of the most poorly funded over decades, say to me that next year they haven't got enough revenue to fund what they need?
Yeah, look, William, I think
you really aimed at you, Secretary of State, in many ways, but it's really as a means to get through to the Treasury. So when the Chancellor, of a typical tin air phraseology of his, says that there's £400 million for little extras and capital funding, that is not well received by schools. So I want to know what you're going to do as a great advocate for education in this country, particularly schools, what you're going to be doing, akin to what the previous Health Secretary did in his department, of putting forward a 10-year plan, being an outspoken advocate for funding within your department to the Treasury. Because at the moment, the Treasury simply do not get it.
So just to come in on that, you said you can't give a figure of how much extra.
Well, we will have a figure, clearly, that's what the spending review does.
You said you couldn't even give us a rough figure. Simon Stevens and the NHS, predecessor Jeremy Hunt, had a clear view that the NHS needed 20 billion extra and made the case for it.
Actually, it wasn't nearly as simple as that, Rob, because that was part of the wider NHS plan and about how money would be spent differently and about the mix of community services versus acute hospitals and so on.
They still set out what needs to be done and how much it would cost.
Yes.
Why don't we have that for education?
We will be doing that, and that's it. I mean, that's what the spending review. That is what the spending review will, and our preparation for the spending review will do. Okay, well, to come back to your question, I totally understand, and you and I have spoken about this specific to your constituency and more generally before. I totally understand the extensive pressures that are on schools, and although it is the case that more money is spent in schools than used to be, schools also do more, a lot more than they used to, and we as a society, as a country, we as a government, by the way, have much higher ambitions for children than used to be the case. So there are those pressures. But yes, we need to make sure that in the spending review settlement we have a plan, a multi-year plan, which sets out, as I say, how we best use what we have, make sure we're spending things like purchasing, which I think we can do better, things like sharing expertise, but also making sure that the core resource that is available to schools, brackets and colleges, by the way, and nurseries and so on, but as we're talking specifically about schools, making sure that that is at the right level.
I'd be very reassured if you can give us that assurance that you will be really being the strong advocate that I know you are for your department with the Treasury.
I've said before, William, I think education is a unique case.
What we'd like to see is, just as Matt Hancock got up last week and did a 10-year plan, and it's got the fund, the NHS has got much of the funding that it's asked for, we'd like to see you get up with a 10-year plan and make sure that education gets the funding that it needs for the future. I mean, is that likely to happen?
It is very likely it will happen, but I will be putting a very strong case, and I think a very compelling case, for education. I've said a number of times before, I think education is unique because we're talking about the shaping of our society and our economy into the future. I think education can do things that no other type of government spending can.